February 14th, 1876, Valentine's Day. In the United States Patent Office, the air was thick with the smell of ink and old paper. At 11:30 a.m., a lawyer representing a young Scotsman named Alexander Graham Bell walked in and handed over a document for a new method of transmitting speech. Exactly 2 hours later, another lawyer rushed into the same building. He was representing Elisha Gray, a famous inventor from Chicago, with an almost identical invention. 2 hours. That tiny window of time is the difference between being a world-famous billionaire and a forgotten name in a history book. If Elisha Gray had skipped breakfast that morning, your phone might be called a gray phone today. But Bell got there first. Or did he? For over 100 years, a dark shadow has hung over this story. Did Alexander Graham Bell, the hero of communication, actually steal the secret to the telephone from his rival's private papers? This isn't just a story about technology. It's a story about a desperate race against time, a battle for millions of dollars, and a man who was obsessed with the human voice. Bell didn't start by wanting to build a phone. He was a teacher of the deaf. He spent his days trying to help people hear, and his nights trying to make the deaf wires of the telegraph speak. He was a man driven by love, by guilt, and by a ruthless ambition to prove that he could do what everyone said was impossible. In this video, we are peeling back the layers of the telephone wars. We will see how Bell manipulated the patent system, how he fought off 600 lawsuits, and how he turned a simple wooden box into the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, an empire that would eventually rule the world's information for a century. Welcome to the story of the man who gave the world a voice, but silenced his rivals forever. To understand the telephone, you have to understand the silence that Alexander Graham Bell lived in. Both his mother and his wife were deaf. His father, Melville Bell, had invented visible speech, a system of symbols that showed people how to position their tongues and lips to make sounds. From a young age, Alexander was obsessed with the mechanics of sound. He didn't see sound as something you just hear. He saw it as a physical vibration, a wave that could be captured and moved. When Bell moved to Boston, he became a professor of vocal physiology. He was a star in the world of deaf education. But in the 1870s, the information gold mine wasn't in education. It was in the telegraph. The telegraph was the internet of the 19th century, but it was slow. You could only send one message at a time over one wire. The person who could invent a harmonic telegraph, a machine that could send multiple messages at once using different musical pitches, would become richer than a king. Bell's investors, two wealthy men named Gardiner Hubbard and Thomas Sanders, didn't want a talking machine. They wanted the harmonic telegraph. They told Bell, "Stop wasting time on the voice. Give us the telegraph." But Bell was a rebel. He had a secret theory. He believed that if you could make a current of electricity vary in intensity, exactly like the air varies when you speak, you could send the human voice across a wire. He was working on two inventions at once, the one his investors paid for and the one his heart desired. He was living a double life in a small attic, surrounded by magnets, wires, and the ghost of a dream. The biggest controversy in the history of science happened in a single afternoon. For months, Bell's talking machine had failed. He could send some noise, but no words. Then, on March 10th, 1876, just days after his patent was granted, he suddenly changed his design. He used something called a liquid transmitter. He spoke into a funnel, and the vibrations moved a needle in a cup of acid water. And suddenly it worked. He shouted those famous words, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." But here is the smoking gun. Bell's original patent application didn't mention a liquid transmitter. However, Elisha Gray's caveat, a pre-patent document, did mention it. When historians looked at Bell's patent later, they found a handwritten note in the margin, added at the last minute, describing the liquid method. Did Bell's lawyer peek at Gray's secret papers at the patent office? Did he tell Bell the secret? This is the $100 billion question. Bell always denied it, but the timing was perfect. For the rest of his life, Elisha Gray would claim that Bell was a thief. Gray had the technical genius, but Bell had something more powerful: the patent. In the world of business, it doesn't matter who thinks of it first. It only matters who signs it first. Bell understood the law better than he understood the wires. He had captured the lightning of logic, and he was ready to use it to shock his competitors out of existence. Even with a working phone, nobody believed in it. The big telegraph companies like Western Union thought the telephone was a toy. They said, "Who wants to talk to someone over a wire when you can send a clear telegram?" Bell was struggling. He even offered to sell his patent to Western Union for $100,000. They laughed and said no. It was the biggest mistake in corporate history. Bell needed a stage. In 1876, the world gathered in Philadelphia for the Centennial Exhibition. It was a massive heat wave. The judges were tired and hungry. They were about to skip Bell's small table in the corner. But then, a man in a royal uniform walked in. It was Emperor Dom Pedro II of Brazil. He had met Bell at a school for the deaf and was a huge fan of his work. The emperor picked up the receiver while Bell spoke from the other end of the building. Suddenly, the emperor's eyes went wide. He dropped the receiver and shouted, "My God, it speaks!" The judges rushed over. The toy was suddenly the star of the show. Within weeks, every newspaper in the world was talking about the telephone. Bell was no longer a struggling teacher. He was a global sensation. But fame brings enemies. Western Union realized they had made a mistake, and they decided to use their billions to crush Bell and steal his market back. The telephone war was about to turn into a legal massacre. Western Union was the Google of the 1870s. They owned the wires, the poles, and the money. When they saw Bell's success, they hired the most dangerous man in science, Thomas Edison. They told Edison, "Bell has a phone that doesn't work very well. Make us a better one." Edison did exactly that. He invented the carbon button microphone, which made the phone sound loud and clear. Western Union started their own telephone company and told Bell, "We own the world. You own nothing." Bell didn't give up. He did something very smart. He didn't try to out-invent Edison. He out-lawyered him. Bell's team filed lawsuit after lawsuit. They argued that because Bell had the first patent, any machine that sent a voice over a wire belonged to him, even if it was a better machine. The legal battle lasted for years. There were over 600 lawsuits against the Bell Telephone Company. Bell had to testify in court hundreds of times. He hated it. He said it made him feel like a criminal. But his lawyers were ruthless. Eventually, Western Union realized they couldn't win in court. In a shocking settlement, Western Union agreed to leave the telephone business entirely, and in exchange, Bell stayed out of the telegraph business. Bell had defeated the biggest monopoly in America. He merged his companies into American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T. The teacher of the deaf was now the commander of conversation. As Bell became one of the richest men on earth, something strange happened. He began to hate the telephone. He called it a distraction and refused to have one in his private study. He was a man who loved silence, and he had accidentally created a world that would never be quiet again. He felt that his work with the deaf was his true legacy, and the phone was just a commercial monster he had unleashed. Bell spent his later years at his estate in Nova Scotia, Canada, called Bainbrig. He used his oceans of gold to fund wild experiments. When President James Garfield was shot in 1881, Bell worked day and night to invent the world's first metal detector to find the bullet inside the president's body. He invented the graphophone, an improvement on Edison's phonograph, and even built massive hydrofoil boats that broke world speed records. He was obsessed with flight, too. He worked with a young team to build some of the first airplanes in America. But no matter what he did, the world only saw him as the telephone man. He was a victim of his own success. He had become a symbol of the corporate age, but in his heart, he was still the boy who wanted to help his mother hear the wind. He lived a life of luxury, but he was always searching for the next unsolved mystery of science. He was a billionaire who realized that money can buy you a lab, but it can't buy you the peace of a silent room. Alexander Graham Bell died on August 2nd, 1922. On the day of his funeral, every single telephone in the United States and Canada was silenced for 1 minute. For 60 seconds, the 14 million phones of the Bell system went dead. It was the most powerful tribute in history. The man who gave the world a voice was gone, but the nervous system he built was just getting started. The business strategy of Alexander Graham Bell is the foundation of the modern tech monopoly. The power of the patent. Bell proved that the law is just as important as the lab. If you own the rights, you own the future. Infrastructure is king. He didn't just sell phones, he built the network. Like Amazon or Google today, he controlled the roads that information traveled on. Persistence through litigation. He didn't win by having the best product. He won by outlasting his rivals in court. Today, every time you make a FaceTime call, send a voice note, or browse the internet, you are using the descendant of Bell's 1876 patent. The 2-hour lead he had over Elisha Gray changed the course of human evolution. We are now a global village, connected by the very wires that Bell once agonized over in a dusty Boston attic. Alexander Graham Bell was the man who turned silence into gold, and in doing so, he made sure that the world would never have to be alone again.